All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Eytan. It's great to see you all. CommonTime Pathways is hosting this podcast today with Jim Bouse. Jim Bouse is the outgoing Director of Enrollment Management Technology at the University of Oregon, and he is now stepping into a consulting role in higher education enrollment management. And congratulations on your, I suppose, first retirement at this juncture. Is that right?
And thanks, Eytan. That's a lot of people I know of, we consider it sometimes failing at retiring. But that's good.
But if you want to fail, then it's really succeeding, aren't you?
True.
Jim is also the past president of ACRAO, which is the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, and he has many years of experience talking about college admissions and college enrollment strategy and enrollment management and what makes a university think about the next generation of students that are going to be walking through their doors. And I'm really glad that you're here. Thanks so much for hanging out with us here at CommonTime.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Yeah, so I want to really dive into your experience because CommonTime focuses on creativity as an asset that higher education enrollment management people, enrollment leaders, can think about in terms of an untapped asset that you want future students to have. But this already kind of exists in another field, right? Talk to me about, from an enrollment leadership perspective, what does athletics recruiting do for your overall strategy? How does it impact your work?
Sometimes, Eytan, that's it can differ a lot if you're looking at really high level. You think major athletic conferences, Big Ten, which the University of Oregon is now part of, which is actually the Big 18, or the SEC or something
Keeps
like
getting
that.
Bigger, doesn't it?
We're looking at huge athletics budgets with name, image, and likeness, producing a lot of changes there in recruiting. So there is some with getting bumps in kind of recruiting activity and applications. You can see bumps if somebody participates like in a large bowl game with a football team, or you get some name recognition, brand recognition out there. If people were maybe unaware that your institution existed, they're for the first time they might be like, oh, who's that?
Exactly.
Oregon, was kind of famous for a long time, and like people, from the East Coast might be like, oh, I remember playing the Oregon Trail game back in grade school or something, and so I was familiar with Oregon existed.
Unless you're from Chicago, in which case it's pronounced Oregon, I believe.
I know. It's kind of like the Orygun kind of pronunciation of that.
Yeah. No, but it's cool.
Anyway, with athletics, you're looking at sometimes with D2, D3, or smaller schools. Sometimes athletic recruiting can make up a larger population. People that participate in that. It may or may not be scholarship athletes, but they just wanted a chance to play. And the same thing can be said with, music. I kind of look back at recruiting, and you're looking at athletes, and a lot of times with admissions, people say like, oh, maybe there's a, special consideration on admitting student athletes. But surprisingly, in higher ed, and probably maybe much lesser known, is that there's probably a lot of opportunities sometimes for highly recruited music majors, or people coming in, if they're intending to do music performance. Maybe music education to a lesser extent, but there can be competition of people like, oh my gosh, we're really looking for an oboe player to round out our orchestra or something like that, or somebody's really gifted and like that. But there's a lot of people that play sports in high school, may not ever play at the collegiate level, or want to play at a smaller school and have an opportunity to kind of continue doing that. The same thing sort of exists for, I look at music education majors. University of Oregon, fantastic music education, performance program. Music education, actually, I think still has, it's got to be, I think maybe in the last 10 years, still 100% job placement rate. Coming out
there's
of
a
that
shortage
for music education.
There.
Yeah.
There's a shortage out there.
So I think it's, I was looking at one of the studies on music education and the opportunities at the high school level. There's probably about 92% of the high school traditional student population has an exposure to being able to participate in music. And this could be, orchestra to band to choral performances, choir, things like that. But maybe about only 42% of students participate in that. But still, you're like 42% of the high school students. That's a massive
That is
number.
An enormous program, right? That's
Huge.
An enormous program. Yeah,
and a lot of times
the averages are only around 8%.
Yeah, coming into college or someone at the university level, students frequently I look at, there's a lot that have musical interests and capabilities. It might not be their major they're looking
Right.
at, but they're still looking for an opportunity to participate in that. So that could extend to things like small ensembles, to groups, to quartets, to pep bands, to
Mm.
marching band, to orchestra level,
Acapella
to,
groups to
a
theater
cappella,
groups to
yeah, a
dance
cappella
teams.
groups.
That's really cool because to me it's interesting when you talk about the reason I brought up athletics is almost like I wanted you to bring up the D2 D3 argument about
Hmm.
participation, that there's a lot of schools that have those programs specifically because it's a valuable asset for them to have, not from a revenue standpoint but from a student life standpoint and from a recruiting standpoint, where so many people have this myth that sports is a money generating thing for colleges. Because everyone talks about Michigan's football team. Everyone talks about the fact that
Yeah.
UGA spent $2.3 million recruiting their football team. The really amazing thing is that 3 years from now, nobody wonders who's going to be on Notre Dame's roster for football. It's already out there. They already have that list 3 years in advance. So for me, as someone who's trying to advocate for artists, this conversation usually from people who aren't in our world goes to, well, sports makes money for the university. And in so many cases, that's a myth. In so
Hmm.
many D2, D3 schools, they have these programs because they know campus life is the most important thing for student retention, student success, mental health, wellness, community environment, all of those things that are powerful. And, you mentioned in one of our earlier conversations, actually, that I think it was, what was it? Louisiana Monroe, University of Louisiana Monroe
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
an NCAA team in water skiing, and it's
Yep.
got 29 NCAA championships, and that's incredible. But that's a perfect example of a program that will never make money for a university, but it's a very unusual niche that draws this really, really interested community. You were talking about internationals who are also getting recruited for that kind of program?
Yeah, and I think this is a fantastic trivia question. If anybody listening to this ever wants to like bring this up, and just say, so in a, you know, 29 NCAA championships in water skiing, you'd have to. So the trivia question would be, what are the two countries that they recruit the most international water skiers from?
From water skiing, gosh, I
Yeah,
don't
what
know.
would you guess those might be?
Uh, uh, I have absolutely no idea. Where do I
I
even
had no
start?
idea. I don't. So I think things surrounded obviously by water, maybe possibly warm water.
I
Australia?
wouldn't pick Swaziland, but yes. Oh, okay,
No, no.
Australia.
So Australia and Greece.
Greece. Oh, that's so fascinating.
Yeah, I
Wow.
just thought it's a very interesting kind of thing. Like the more you know.
That's really cool. But I think this is all really just a testament to the value of having more niche programs that students can be attracted to, right? If you are, even say you're a cellist in the orchestra and you really love the cello, but you want to study biology or biomedical engineering, you're going to automatically search for a place where you can both study your desired degree program and play in an orchestra. You're not going to go someplace where they just don't offer it, unless, of course, you go to one of the Ivy Leagues and you're like, I got it, I don't care. All of them happen to have
Yeah.
orchestras, which is great. But the point that's being made here is that those students from Greece and Australia wouldn't go to Monroe, Louisiana,
Oh,
unless there was an NCAA program that was
right.
stellar, right? But none of them are majoring in water skiing.
No, no. And one of the things
So
I love about music is it's more prevalent. People have more ties to that. There's different ways to approach that. So one of the things similar to athletics is this gets into retention and kind of students coming and what their involvement, levels of belonging, and how that contributes to retention and the likelihood to continue through to degree. So you have those traditional three pillars of retention, which are, academic. So can you be successful in your class? Are you prepared for that? And then the next one is always financial.
right.
Do you have the financial wherewithal or the support or scholarships or grants or things to persist? And then the other one's always that social piece of that three-legged stool. So a lot
Mm,
of times coming into something like if you have an affiliation with music and you have a program or a group, this is going to consist of, it could be other freshmen, but sophomores, juniors, seniors, people that have
mm,
already been there, led the way, show you how to be successful. So that in that huge one too, if you're not just coming from the local area, if you're coming from a long distance, is that sense of like, I've kind of found my group and my people,
mm.
and other people can show me the way. You're making friends more So there's been a lot of like retention things, looking at even point of sale things and
Yeah.
data analysis of are students, are there indicators that students aren't making friends on campus or they're not making connections? And those are
Yeah.
the people that usually like an intervention comes in. But having strong things like athletics or music or other groups and things to affiliate with as soon as you get there
Community.
just really lend it
Community.
that sense of community and belonging. Your odds of retaining and actually graduating are much higher.
Talk to me for a second about, and this is really interesting to me. How does this change the narrative for enrollment leadership away from just athletics as the way to recruit community? How do we change the narrative? Because I mean, and I tell the story all the time. My 3-year-old, this was last year, he's 4 now, when he was in mini kickers soccer in our in our little suburban town here, decided to, we downloaded the app to communicate with the coach about field assignments, rain delays, and such and such and such. And the first push notification we got was an advertisement: NCSA, want to play sports in college? Sign up here.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I'm like, okay, I understand this is a generic push notification on the app, but 14 years in advance, I'm getting messaging that a sport can help my kid find their way to college.
Well, that's a
How do we
transcontinental
change?
recruiting pipeline right there.
No kidding. No kidding. But so
Thousands of miles from, yeah.
it's wild. And so I'm thinking to myself, how do we shift the narrative so that it's anything that gives you creative energy, power, community, and empathy, education, these things that are super important moving forward, especially in the face of AI? How do we change the narrative around these things so that not only enrollment leaders, but general population, people who want their kids to take piano lessons, don't think of it as just something nice? Like, nobody says soccer is just nice. They say, oh, soccer is really good for their health and well-being, and it might get them into college one day. Like, there's always that extra sentence added on the end. How do we start shifting that and then using enrollment leadership to start helping parents shift their own narrative? It's
There's
a
a lot
lot.
there.
It's
And
a
I think,
big
yeah.
dream. Yeah.
So coming out of, my background and kind of more the technology side, but, I've come backgrounds in government, MBA, lots of other things too, and pairing that up with tech is really what you might be seeing as kind of the humanities and softer skills. So I think, we're in it now. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago when I was doing a presentation on artificial intelligence, now, I mean, the pace of change radically has increased, more
Insane.
so than any other time in human history. And so I think rightfully so, what enrollment management has to wrestle with in changing this narrative, or not even changing it, and certainly not in a disingenuous way, but
Yeah.
realistically bringing this up and addressing concerns of students and parents as they approach higher education and looking at, wow, this is something where things are changing rapidly. So if we engage in higher education, how is my student going to come out the other side? How is this institution best going to prepare them for a career after this and still have skills that are valued, and that somebody's going to hire you, you're going to have a job, you're going to have employment, on to retirement. I mean, huge societal kind of things to consider. So I think one thing to get across with that narrative is about creative skills and artistic intelligence. It's really looking at, hey, a lot of those hard skills where you can see the narrative in the last 10 plus years has been everybody needs to learn how to code.
Yep. STEM degrees.
So, yeah, STEM degrees, hard sciences, hard skills. And that's still good to have that understanding. Like anything, it's a good to have an understanding of how that works. And that's where
Right.
you want that kind of breadth of education so you can make these connections between these things in different areas. But I think what we can look at now are how soft skills should be and are becoming more desirable and relevant in a world where hard skills are easier for an AI model to replace. So one of the very first things that really popped up is coding. And
Yeah.
now it's like, entry level coders. Of course, there's other things about like you got to have entry level to eventually get senior level to, how are people going to get that experience?
Right.
Um, but coming in, things like coding, um, or some things, like legal reviews or different areas like that, and even some STEM things where those hard things are getting replaced quickly. I mean, you still need to go back and do QA, quality assurance checks, et cetera. But basically, you're looking at how can those soft skills and the things that are harder for, you know, a lot of conversations around AI are like, what are those things that can't be replaced? Or electricians or plumbers or something where it's on site. Although I would argue with the rise of, how good is robotics going to be in 10 years, that we have to be
Yeah.
careful in a lot of these different areas. But really getting back to that hard skills, we're looking at that creativity, human empathy, judgment, experience, making those leaps in kind of that creative way and making those
Mm.
human connections. And it gets down to knowing, have the knowledge to use AI tools, but then leverage them with the human experience that higher ed can kind of help you shape that, and empathy and creativity, the path that's going to create longer term value. So things that are going to be more difficult for AI to replace, we're going to be just coming in and saying, yes, AI can do this. Here's the technical thing, but what should it do?
Mm.
What is the problem we're really trying to solve? Where are people, looking at the next level thing? So I think that's where we can look at soft skills. But then I think from the outside, I always appreciate people saying, of course you're going to say that. You want people to come to higher ed. You're
Sure.
just recruiting people. So why should I believe
Sure.
you? So I think that needs to be followed up with my second thing I look at is leveraging insights and thoughts from well-known figures in the industry and people who, people
Mm.
from the outside maybe have more awareness of like, haven't really heard of the University of Oregon, for example, but I have heard of Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA,
Yeah, sure.
or maybe I'm looking at the CEO of Anthropic, or something else like this that's got out there really pushing the AI industry.
Right.
So what are they seeing from that perspective? So Jensen, who just up the road here is a alumni at Oregon State University, about 50 miles north of me.
Mm.
Um, Looking at an interview recently where he was talking about technical knowledge becoming more of a commodity, just like we were talking about,
Right.
and the need for human empathy and inference, and cultivating an ability to think about what's next,
Mm.
what's not yet been created, what or how are we anticipating needs and desires. So this really gets into, looking at cultural things, looking at, creativity to think beyond. And he was talking about being able, people that can look around the corner or look at
Right.
shifting cultural needs, tastes, things like that. And those are the people that really add a lot to shaping. Okay, AI, you can do
Mm.
this technical thing. I can set this up, but where should I point it? Where should I
So that's
direct the
interesting.
AI?
The concept of taste is interesting. The idea of curating the information so that the AI isn't just spitting something that you can then say, sure, why not? The idea
Mm-hmm.
of pointing it in a certain direction is very interesting too. I think I'm trying to remember, somebody made a quote. Somebody quoted something. I'm trying to remember this here, but it's like, skill is the ability to hit the target in front of you. Excellence is the ability to hit the target behind the one everyone else can hit. And genius is knowing that there's a target 100 yards away that nobody else can see yet.
Yeah.
The idea that you can point the AI in the direction nobody sees yet, so the direction that's around the corner that nobody's discovered yet. That's where the next Mozart shows up. That's where the next Barry Bonds shows up. I put him in that category. Why not? I grew up in the San Francisco area. It's fine. So
Yeah.
I think
Well,
that
San
in the
Francisco
end,
area, I
yeah,
was thinking the Steve Jobs kind of thing, or some of the moves Apple
sure,
made early on.
absolutely.
A lot of things are timing though too. So it was the first time that it was like, oh, what do you mean you're getting rid of a DVD drive and you just have USB?
Yep.
And back then, or a CD drive. Like, we need that. I'm like, nope.
No,
And
you
then
don't.
pretty soon it's going to like, you don't even need a lot of these connections. So it was
Hmm.
looking at that. What's next? Where's this actually moving to? But also the timing to know, are we just in the edge where people are beginning to be ready for this? You don't want to be too early. We've got some really good
Yeah,
things, and you've got no adoption that's going to get taken up on that. But
that's the
yeah,
hard
no,
part about
I
building a
concur.
business for
That's a
it too.
great analogy with the targets.
Well, that's interesting. So I love how we're talking about what higher ed can do and how AI is going to impact the way that we recruit people generally. You're right about soft skills. I think that the most valuable things that we can teach are creative education, creativity, and empathy, specifically because those things can be taught. I have actually written about this before.
Mhm.
Creativity and creative intelligence is not something that's born. It's not something that's talent based. It's not something innate. It's something that can be trained and habitualized. It's like health. It's like physical health. We have physical education in our K 12 systems, which require our students to be able to physically perform certain things. Things about understanding how to shoot a basketball or run a mile or do that stupid pacer test that haunts us all to this day. The idea of, I can't believe I just brought that up in a podcast. Wow, there is some trauma there. But boop. All right, sorry. No. So for me, the physical education piece is about us training our bodies and habitualizing physical wellness in a way that allows us to feel like we are physically functioning human beings. Creative education is in just the same way trainable and teachable, but we don't know how to teach it as well because we can't see the things that are creative education frameworks that happens in our brain. And so the most interesting thing to me is that I think creative education requires two things, which is knowledge of a medium and time for unstructured free play. Because what do we do in the sports world all the time? You have a basketball practice for an hour with a bunch of middle schoolers. You do warm-ups. Then first you stretch, then you do warm-ups, then you do drills, and then you scrimmage. In the last 15 to 20 minutes of every hour, 25 to 30% to 40% of every single practice is unstructured free play where they can then apply the medium that they just studied and practiced. And for us, we take creativity and suspect that unless you're Taylor Swift or Yo-Yo Ma, that it's just not happening for you. That's like saying if you're not Steph Curry, you're never going to play basketball. But I'll bet you basketball sales in the country far outpace the number of NBA players. So, absolutely, right. It's everybody who's on the street corner playing a pickup game and everybody who has their kid who's going to, a basketball practice on the weekends and after school. And every single school has those things. So why don't we create structures where creative education can actually happen? We don't just go to NBA games and watch the Golden State Warriors play because we think they are technically skilled. They are. But it's those moments where we watch the art happen in the gap of those things. That's where real creativity starts to play in, and that's where we talk about Pelé's beautiful game.
And just watching the flow.
Exactly.
So sometimes for me, when I lived in Miami, I attended like all kinds of all the professional sports and things like that. So the first time I ever attended the professional Florida Panthers hockey NHL team, I just think NHL does not translate to television very well as far as the in-person experience.
As far as frame rate?
Just seeing all the ice and just watching the flow of people just floating around and skating and sliding and doing all that. It's just it's almost mesmerizing.
It's incredible
to see that, but see that beauty of just appreciating that spacing and passes and everything.
Exactly.
And like, oh my gosh, that was magical.
Exactly. And I think the same thing happens when we go to a symphony. The same thing happens when we go to a Taylor Swift concert. The same thing happens when we go to the ballet or the opera or when we go to an Indian Bollywood dance festival. When we see these things that are like, wow, that was just, it immersed me in this art, in this beauty, in this aesthetic experience, which, and I could talk about art cure and the mental health of being engaged in artistic experiences, which I think also happens in sports. But I think that the most important thing for me to really just drill in on here is that creativity and creative education is something that we can do in K-12. It's something that we can do as well as empathy education, how to read other people and read social circumstances in ways that allow us to not only plan for and anticipate behaviors, but learn how to actually then start influencing things around us. So talk to me a bit about how K-12, and I did ask I want to ask a very specific program, like how do we take enrollment leadership at the university level and how do we talk to K-12 programs about the things that are important to us? How do we talk to them about soft skills? I have a friend who yesterday at a town meeting in Massachusetts, their town just cut funding for fine and performing arts, yet increased $210,000 of a request for the football team that hasn't won in a year and a half, right? Like, how do we emphasize to these K-12 programs, to these K-12 school committees, that it's these soft skills that Jensen Huang is talking about that are the most important and that we mostly learn those things in art classes and in music classes and in dance classes?
Yeah, I think it's that you need to successfully make the argument And what I would consider, you need to be able to produce something that's like essentially your elevator speech,
Mm.
your 1, 2 minute kind of take on why are those important, and be able to convey that information. It can't take a long time.
No.
We're in the world of just like TikTok and small snippet kind of things. And just to look at, and this is where I think it really gets down to financial consideration and concern, where people look at, oh, we're going to cut this program because it's costing too much and whatever, and we don't see the value in this. But making that, again, where I went back to financial concerns of students and parents and higher education, which is one of those the largest, financial decision and purchase you're going to make aside from, possibly purchasing a home,
Yeah, definitely.
that investment, which is something where, it can't be taken away from you. You'll have that education forever. But being able to convey, this is where this is important because this is going to give you a leg up in the new world with the tools you're going to have to iterate and learn constantly and produce that value and make the case for what can you lend on top of these baseline AI tools and capabilities and things like that that everybody maybe has as a foundational level. Where are you going to add that value on top of that? So
Mm.
that's where also I think things like empathy maybe get short shrift, get a bad name, or some people might even look at that and think like, wow, that's weak. Or same people might think kindness is weak or whatever, and you need to be strong and just,
Mm.
kind of thing. But you need to be able to convey like empathy isn't just like, oh, are you feeling bad? Or you just, kind of that kind of thing. Where I don't think, see, I think people don't understand empathy, but you need to convey that, hey, empathy is also something where these are where people that are shaping markets, that are shaping what comes next, that are producing
Mm.
products, that are marketing to people. Empathy is
Because
being
they
able to
can
get
read the
outside,
people in the
right?
market. Right.
Because you need to be able to realize empathy is stepping outside yourself,
Yes.
placing yourself in somebody else's shoes, seeing it from their point of view, and not just living in the world where you have your personal blinders on and maybe
Mm.
aren't aware of your own blind spots. So that's where you're going to surround
Mm.
yourself with other people, be able to step outside yourself, see the world from other positions, and that way you can see and find needs and niches that are not met. And what people are looking for next is that, and that's the powerful piece of empathy that I see. So looking at K-12, that's a long tail in the education pipeline. Maybe not as far back as your child being asked to like, hey, professional soccer is just right around the corner.
At
you know,
3 years, at three
yeah,
years old.
at 3 years old, yeah. But I am an advocate for like, yeah, I mean, you should be recruiting people earlier on and reaching
Mm.
down to K-12 or middle school and things like that, and need to show them the
Yeah.
possibilities of what they need to do. But I think in the K-12 side, creativity and empathy, and looking back on the connection with music and sometimes what people think of hard skills or mathematics and things like that. And
Mm.
some studies have shown, connection between musical inclination and things like mathematics and sometimes coding and like that. And more recent studies that look like those connections are based, between maybe more general intelligence and being able to flow between those things. But there are a lot of things like structures in music and structures in math and perceiving pitch and melody and harmony and how those things blend together. Um, how can you translate I think artistic intelligence and um, kind of going back to K-12 and kind of really, again, making that a message for how does somebody approach something? And this is where, another very marketable skill is communication. So AI,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you can say,
Yep.
draft me an email, draft me a marketing promo, whatever. But then you're like, does it just look like AI read it? And if everybody's doing that, again, you're back to that same base foundational level. But if you're looking at somebody with art that has the ability to think about how do I want to translate a vision or a message they're trying to get across into what is the most
Mm.
appropriate medium or channel or communications channel to communicate this and actually reach an audience where it actually
Mm.
comes in and makes a difference. You can think of commercials you watch that really tug at those heartstrings
Yeah.
and just develop an emotional feel, and how much spending a decision somebody might make is really based on that kind of emotional, like, oh, how does it
Yeah.
make you feel kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Absolutely.
I was looking at also it's kind of enough in the art and creativity and empathy to realize it's not just are you talking too much? I feel like I'm doing that right now, but it's
No,
also I was
not at
thinking
all.
Miles Davis, is kind of famous for his summary of how his musical style was. It's, what do you say? It's not the notes you play, it's the notes you don't play.
Yes, which is a whole. It's like when Michelangelo said, I'm not sculpting the rock. I'm just removing the unnecessary pieces." Like, thanks,
Yeah.
dude. We all.
Yeah. And I mean, not everybody has that, but the other piece in art, I think, is, in that and knowing not what not to say or what not to do is just as powerful. And it
Oh
kind of reminds
man,
me of a detective thing when you walk into a room and it's not just, hey, do you remember what was here? It's recognizing what's not here that should be.
that
Or,
is awesome. That is awesome. That observation right there is a beautiful nugget of wisdom that I think so many of us forget on a daily basis. It's worth repeating, so I'm going to repeat it back to you.
okay,
Tell me if I don't get it. But
yeah,
ultimately, what you're talking about, and I think this ties back to taste. This ties back to vision. This ties back to curating information. It's not just processing the information that's in front of you. It's thinking contextually, what's just missing? What are the things that we're not saying? What are the things that we're not doing? That also ties into your empathy education and your empathetic ability. What are people not saying to me with their words? What is their body saying? But what should it be saying if this is the impetus and manipulation behind their feelings? And so I think that what you're hitting on is widely applicable. It's not just the information that you're receiving; it's the information that you should be receiving that you're not receiving.
and sometimes psychology, if you're looking at this, and those sorts of skills are very powerful. You think of ads, the negative space, I think, in art. So you'll see this in
A
advertisements,
friend of mine refers
logos,
to it as the gap. Mind
the
the
gap.
gap.
Yeah. So Hershey's Kisses, the logo, the
Sure.
difference between you get the K to the I and actually there's the shape of a Hershey's Kiss within there, or FedEx, where the E to X
The
has
blank
that
space is an
forward
arrow.
pointing arrow,
I
right,
want you
which
to know
looks
you
at
just changed
action
somebody's
and,
life. You just changed
yeah,
somebody's life because so many people don't know that, and then you can't unsee it once you see it.
yeah.
There is an just public service announcement. Jim is absolutely right. There is an arrow in the FedEx logo, and it's the white space between the capital E and the lowercase x. If you've never seen it before, you will no longer be able to unsee it. Just so everybody knows. Okay, cool.
And the same is true of psychology of sometimes of knowing what not to say. So you don't want to have to, and this is the psychology of kind of letting somebody make the connections themselves. So it's having like art direction in the movie where you don't show everything. You have to leave that space, or writing a good book or story, to let the people who are watching that, who are reading it, who are hearing you, fill in and make those connections themselves. Because if you paint that picture all the way through, it's just them listening to you. But
As opposed to
if
them
you
relating
engage
to the
them,
person in the story.
yes, you lead it just enough where you say something, and then you let them engage their own creativity and make those connections themselves. You know, it can make people feel like, oh, I figured this out.
Well, and it
I'm a
lets
little,
them,
I'm kind of
and
smart, and they're
but
respecting
it
my
lets them
ability to
relate
make
to.
those connections. Yeah,
But it lets them relate to the character. When you illuminate that someone is something, you take away part of that mystery of who that person is or might be. And that creates less space where the reader can actually go in and then relate to that character and insert their own inferences based on their own experience, whether they're an ENFJ or an INT or whatever it is
yeah.
on their Myers-Briggs test. They can really begin to then connect characters to their own personality types and their own experiences. So that's fascinating. But as we talk about this and
Yeah.
how this is all moving, we've mentioned AI a few times. We've mentioned arts and creativity and soft skills, and we've mentioned K through 12 moving into higher ed. How do you think the field of enrollment management is going to change in the next 2 to 5 years, based on what's happening now, based on what we're being demanded that's being demanded of us in higher ed in terms of return on investment, in terms of all these other conversations? Because I know we've had discussions in the past where it's very clear that while a professional musician doesn't have an average salary of over X dollars, it's the music major who goes and becomes a lawyer, or the music major and goes into tech, or the music major who goes into sales, or the music major who goes into statistics, or if you're Brian May, astrophysics, right? Like What is it that we can do to quantify some of these things in terms of the ROI that's being demanded? How is enrollment leadership going to have to start shifting its own narrative in order to be able to function in the new world?
It's a big.
I don't ask small questions on this podcast.
No. I'm just thinking it's the big one that higher ed needs to wrestle with, and some are further ahead than others, and should be. I've recently spent some time in the provost council looking at AI policy and just trying to work the work group on that and how you shape that for the university. University of Florida has like the provost initiative. Every 10 years they look at a certain thing. So about 3 years ago they started their initiative on like becoming the AI university.
Yep.
So really looking at that focus, I think this is where enrollment leadership, you're really driven more now to, the role of working with the president, the provost, the deans, and really aligning the academic opportunities with career outcomes becomes more necessary than ever. Because it can't just be the challenges, again, get back to students, parents, and like, how are you going to prepare me and our child for what's coming? So if you're making a decision to go to a typical 4-year sort of university or college, you're probably a year out when you're a junior and making that decision if you're a traditional student coming out of high school. So can you tell me what AI and the job market's going to look like in 5 years?
No, absolutely not.
I mean, think how much change has happened in the last 5.
In the last 6 months.
Right.
Yeah.
So huge. And it's just that curve's going to get more of that sort of exponential curve. So actually aligning that with not just, hey, come to our school and do this kind of thing, but working with everyone on the university, in particular the academic side, of say, what's the experience when a student gets here? How are we going to differentiate ourselves, and how are we going to position ourselves to actually truly have that, not be just hype and hyperbole, but they arrive here and they go, yes, what you promised, I'm actually exceeding those expectations. Because my other one is always like, expectations are resentments in waiting. So be careful of what you position people to do.
Quote. Expectations are resentments in waiting. Interesting.
So make sure you can meet or exceed those. And so this is where that academic experience and how you're inculcating AI tools and methodologies within, and it's not just, I think we're past you're cheating on the thing because you asked AI and they wrote a paper for you. You have to expect that and scaffold instructions and assume, I want you to use AI.
Right.
Now you're going to have to layer on your human piece on this, everything else you've been learning. How are you adding value to this? And in that the confidence level of the students and parents are going to go through that 4-year time frame, and you're going to graduate them on the other side, and you're going to have them prepared to be competitive in that career field, in that career.
And those are all soft skills. And those are all soft skills.
Right. How do you layer that on there, especially when we're assuming that's going to be AI is going to be even deeper into it by that point in time.
But how do you recruit those soft skills as an enrollment management person? How do you actively seek to enroll people with soft skills?
I think you can look at a lot of that by, I don't know. That's a challenge. I mean, you can look at who's taking what sort of.
That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you can look at like who's taking what kind of AP scores and AP tests, but there's a lot. I think it's a gap, as you mentioned. That's the gap again of is that something you and CommonTime are striving to fill and create that tie between, hey, higher ed, there is all these folks out here who maybe you don't know about until they apply to you and they start filling in their activities and extracurriculars and all that kind of stuff. Then you're aware of that. But how do you become aware of that before they come to you and fill out an application?
So you can intentionally build a relationship with them to seed the enrollment pool.
Yep.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think that, to me, is a perfect way to hit the nail on the head. And I know we only have a little bit of time left. So let me just ask, because, again, congratulations on your first of what I believe will be many retirements. My question to you is as follows. If there is an enrollment person, someone who wants to work in college admissions, someone who wants to be a director of undergraduate studies at a university, can you tell me what is it that you have as advice for that person who wants to go into academia in this changing world? What is it? What 1-2 things that you really want to say to somebody who's brand new into this field?
I'll do 3 really quick.
Do it.
So the really high level one is, first, like anything, Make sure, do you have an affinity for the mission of higher education writ large? How can it better the lives of students and the larger society around you? So
Mm.
understanding what's that important, the why. Do you have a
Yeah.
why to be involved anyway? That's going to make your life so much better. For me, it's the difference. I always tell students when they're coming in, it's the difference between having a job and a career. Something you want to
Nice.
wake up every morning and go, I get to go to work and not just I have to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
Next, I think it'd be focus on your area of interest or expertise. So do you have something you're interested in or something you're good at? And hopefully those two things align.
Mm.
They might not always all the time, and you can still do that, but if they connect and they align, great. Lastly, I think once you're in to that as you're kind of growing your career, I'd say always look for opportunities to be involved in initiatives, projects, getting invited to certain meetings about different topics, professional activities that really allow you to expand your experience and understanding of kind of the interconnectedness of operations and across and like enrollment management in this area and beyond that. So how does the whole institution or anything you're involved in, how do those operations all fit together? And what is necessary from here? What's the upstream and downstream effects in that? Who is maybe related and has an impact 1, 2, 3, 4 levels outside of what you're doing?
That's so fascinating. Have you ever heard of ikigai, the Japanese psychological term? Um, I don't know. Have you heard of ikigai before?
Peripherally, but I couldn't recite it
It's
back to
almost
you.
exactly what you're talking about right now. The idea is finding what the world needs, which is the why. Finding what you love, what you're good at, and what you can be paid for, and finding the one thing that can do all those things. The things that can create true happiness in life. So find your why, find the thing that you love and that you're passionate about and that you're good at within what the world needs, and then make sure you can get paid for it. that's
Yeah.
that's the whole thing, and it's wonderful. I went through that journey myself when I was figuring out what I wanted to do before I created. As I was creating CommonTime, I didn't know it yet, and it's just. I think that's incredibly wise advice, sage advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
As sagacious as you are in your first retirement, and I can't wait to talk to you in your second and third retirements. But
Oh, look forward to it.
it's gonna be a long journey, and this is really exciting. And thank you so much for hanging out with us here at Common Time Pathways. And I
Yeah.
hope very much that we can continue to grow our own relationship. And I want Common Time to develop a partnership with Acro in the future. And it's all about the soft skills these days. So thank you for really spending the time with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Eytan. It's been a pleasure.